The rain fell in sheets across the abandoned colony outpost, turning the red dust of Cathara Prime into rivers of rust-colored mud. Mara pressed herself against the crumbling wall of what had once been a supply depot, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. 3 months alone on this god-forsaken rock, and she still wasn't used to the bone-deep chill that came with the planet's endless storms. She was checking her scanner for the 10th time that hour when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the wind or the rain. A mewling, high-pitched and desperate, carried on the gusts that whipped through the ruins. Mara's hand went to the plasma pistol at her hip. On Cathara Prime, nothing made noise unless it was hunting or being hunted. She moved carefully through the downpour, following the cries to a collapsed section of prefab housing. There, huddled in a shallow depression that offered almost no protection from the elements, were 4 of them. Kethryn cubs. Mara froze. The Kethrans were apex predators, 6-limbed killing machines that had driven humanity off 3 colony worlds before the armistice. Adults stood nearly 8 feet tall with chitinous exoskeletons, razor-sharp mandibles, and a hunting instinct that made Earth's wolves look like house cats. These cubs were small, maybe the size of large dogs, but their juvenile claws were already wicked-looking, and their mandibles clicked weakly as they shivered. The smallest one, its carapace still soft and mottled gray instead of the deep black of adults, looked up at her with multifaceted eyes that reflected the lightning. It made a sound, softer than the others, almost a question. Every survival instinct Mara possessed screamed at her to walk away, to let nature take its course. The Kethrans had killed her brother on Epsilon Station. They'd destroyed her home. They were the reason she was stuck on this miserable planet, salvaging what little remained of humanity's failed expansion. But as she stood there, rain streaming down her face, all she could see were 4 terrified children, abandoned and dying in the cold. "God damn it," Mara whispered. She holstered her weapon and approached slowly, hands spread. The cubs tensed, their small bodies coiling like springs. The smallest one, she decided to call him Kerr, though she had no idea if that was appropriate, chittered nervously and tried to burrow deeper into the mud. "Hey," Mara said softly, crouching down. "Hey, it's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." They didn't understand her words, but something in her tone must have registered. The cubs watched her, trembling, as she carefully opened her weatherproof jacket. The thermal lining was designed for human survival in hostile environments, and right now, it was the warmest place on this entire planet. "Come on," she coaxed, patting the inside of the jacket. "Come here. It's warm." Kerr was the first to move. The little cub crawled forward hesitantly, leaving small tracks in the mud, and pressed against her side. Mara held her breath as she felt the strange texture of its carapace, harder than skin but not quite shell, still developing. She wrapped one side of the jacket around Kerr, and the cub immediately burrowed closer, seeking warmth. The others watched. Then one by one they came. They climbed over each other in their desperation to escape the cold, their clawed feet pricking through her shirt but never quite breaking skin. Mara adjusted her position, trying to accommodate all 4 as they pressed against her torso, their small bodies fitting surprisingly well in the space her jacket provided. She closed the jacket as much as she could, creating a dark, warm cave with her own body heat. The cubs settled immediately, their chittering fading to soft, rhythmic clicking, a sound she realized might be their version of purring. "Okay," Mara said to herself, rain still pelting her head and shoulders. Now what? She couldn't take them back to her shelter, a human facility that still had automated defenses that would identify them as hostile. She couldn't leave them here, and she certainly couldn't contact the Kethran territories. The armistice was fragile, and any human attempting contact with their species would be seen as a threat or a spy, so Mara did the only thing she could. She sat down against the wall, pulled her hood up, and held 4 predator cubs against her chest while the storm raged around them. Hours passed. The rain eventually lessened to a drizzle, then stopped altogether. Cathara Prime's pale sun broke through the clouds, and with it came warmth. The cubs began to stir, their energy returning. Kerr poked his head out first, mandibles clicking as he tested the air. Mara carefully opened her jacket, and the cubs tumbled out, suddenly animated. They bounded around her in circles, their movements already showing the lethal grace they'd possess as adults. One of them, the largest, approached and pressed its head against her hand. The gesture was so distinctly like a puppy that Mara laughed despite herself. "You're welcome, I guess." A sound made her look up sharply. At the edge of the ruins stood an adult Catherine, massive and terrifying in the daylight. Its black carapace gleamed, and its 6 limbs could cross the distance to Mara in seconds. She reached for her pistol knowing it was useless, but the adult didn't attack. It was looking at the cubs, then at Mara, then back at the cubs. One of the little ones, Kerr, ran to the adult, chittering excitedly. The adult lowered its head, touching the cub gently with its mandibles. Then it looked at Mara. For a long moment, Human and Catherine regarded each other across the no-man's land of the ruined colony. The adult made a sound, low and resonant, nothing like the cubs' high-pitched voices. Then it turned and the cubs followed, all except Kerr, who paused at the edge of the ruins and looked back at her one last time. Mara raised her hand in a small wave. The cub chittered once, then disappeared after its family. Mara sat there for a long time after they were gone, her jacket still warm from tiny bodies, wondering if she'd just done the stupidest or the bravest thing in her life. Maybe both. Maybe that's what being human meant, choosing compassion even when instinct screamed otherwise. She stood, brushed the mud from her pants, and headed back to her shelter. The galaxy was cold and hostile, filled with species that had every reason to hate each other. But sometimes, Mara thought, sometimes you just opened your jacket and let the warmth in, even if they had claws.